All right, I think that's long enough. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our 800,000 Sales Conversations by Email webinar. Um, the goal today is to actually analyze statistics on sales emails, on what works and what doesn't work, as well as to understand the different types of decision makers, as well as their reactions to prospecting. Now, this webinar is roughly going to be 30 minutes, and throughout this 30 minutes, you are welcome to actually ask your questions, which I will be addressing just after the webinar in our question and answer segment. So please feel free to just comment down below, and we'll try and get onto your questions just after. All right, so to start off, let's actually define prospection. What is prospection? Prospection is the time spent by a sales rep to actually prospect for new clients. Let's have a look at the typical day of a sales rep, which helps us to understand the obstacles behind prospection. So you'll see here that sales reps typically spend the most part of their day on three principal activities. The first is actually sourcing activities, which forms 13%. The next is meeting activities, which forms another 20%. And finally, the last is outreach activities. So what does this all mean? Sourcing activities would be a little bit of administrative tasks or response to emails, or basically a task that doesn't involve sales whatsoever. The other 20% is where a sales rep actually does the most highly valued tasks, such as meeting a prospect or being on a sales call with a prospect, understanding the prospect's pain points, or pitching their products. And finally, the last 67%, which is outreach activities, is simply a sales rep trying to actually get into contact to actually have a meeting or sales call with the prospect. This involves basically getting an email, being on LinkedIn, or looking for a phone number or looking for an address. So why do sales reps actually spend so much time of their time on contact or outreach tasks? Well, the number of attempts to actually reach a decision maker has steadily increased in the years gone by. And back in 2010, we actually started with a 4.7 attempts to actually reach a decision maker. Over the years, this has actually increased to right now where it is, which is 8.2 attempts. So if somebody has told you that, yes, I did prospecting before and I totally understand how that works, well, it's not going to work. What actually worked before might not be working now. And salespeople have to be a lot more efficient to actually get in touch with a decision maker. And if this continues, salespeople are really going to have to send a lot more emails. So let's take a look at the data I've crunched. This data includes emails sent to 100,000 decision makers in various industries and all across the UK, the Nordics, and as well as Benelux. So what we've analyzed is content, the types of responses, as well as the types of decision makers we're trying to talk to. The last classified by demographics and firmographics. Now, we're going to have a look at, the first question we're going to take a look at is basically what is the best time to actually send an email? Now, sales reps normally send emails throughout the week, so that is Mondays to Fridays. But here we have an interesting stat actually. The parts in blue indicate the number of emails sent by all the sales reps, and the graph in green basically shows you the availability of the recipient. So it gives you an index of availability. So we see constantly that, throughout the week, from Monday to Friday, normally most decision makers are available. And interestingly, on Sunday, some executives actually return to their inbox and take a look at their emails as well. I'll assume this is on Sunday evening. So, even though sales reps don't have this data, well, because they're working throughout the week, logically they send the emails across every day of the week, and this does not impact it very much. The result stays quite consistent with a very tiny drop just on Monday. So if you're a sales rep, you can really put a little more effort on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. And although this may sound like bad news, you can consider doing it on Sunday as well, if you feel inclined to work. Now, let's dive a little bit deeper into emails. The first part of an email, which is the subject line. The subject line is basically the starting line of an email. The subject line is what makes recipients open your email, and there has been a lot of literature that's been written on this subject. So let's have a look and see what works in Northern Europe. Before I go into further detail about the subject line, we're also going to delve a little bit deeper into the preview. Now, what is a preview? A preview is basically the 30 to 50 characters that most mail clients display, whether or not on your mobile phone or on your computer. You're actually going to take information from both the preview and the subject line, and your brain is going to decide in a split second whether or not you're actually going to open the mail or trash the mail. So, whether the mail is from a very important business associate, or from a huge company you're trying to prospect, or from African royalty who's offering to send you free money, your brain is going to decide in a split second using these two pieces of information to decide what you're going to do with the mail. So, let's start with the size of the subject line and what is the impact of the size. If we take a look at the graph, you'll actually see that the average number of words on a subject line are between 3 to 5, and this does not actually affect the open rate a lot. So most people, as long as your subject line is not ridiculously long, it's not going to affect the open rate of your email. Now, so contrary to popular belief, the size or length basically has zero impact on a recipient's interest. Now, let's go into more detail on this, and let's talk about the variables which allow personalization. So, if you actually look at the details of a subject line, we can actually customize certain variables in a subject line. So, for example, here we've done an analysis on several factors. This includes having a company name in the subject line, which has given a very positive result of plus 15%. Starting with the lowercase at the start of the subject line, which some sales reps use in order to have a more manual effect. Instead of it making it look automated, perhaps by automated solution, they want to make it look manual, and therefore they start with lowercase, and that actually increases the open rates as well. Other things we've actually analyzed include a question mark, a first name, as well as an exclamation mark in the subject line. And all of these have very little impact if you think about it. Plus 1.8, 0.9%, as well as 0.4%. It doesn't really change whether or not people open your email. Now, having special characters on the other hand, such as a slash or brackets, tend to, my opinion, is it makes your email look a little bit spammy. It looks spam, it looks automated, it looks like you're trying to get attention, and therefore it drives a negative impact on your open rates, almost 11%. Now let's take a look at the same graph in terms of variables for the preview. So, looking at the preview, if we look at the positive points, starting with a good morning or good evening, as well as the first name, such as John, or starting with a hello, basically drives responses. And you'll see that the performance is actually quite astonishing. It's a plus 104% increase in open rates. So from this, we can gather that starting with I would say, a positive attitude and a high level of energy actually invokes open rates, actually improves your open rate, excuse me. And you actually want to make sure that what you're trying not to do is have too formal a start. If you're starting with dear sir, dear madam, dear Mrs., or having their last name, like dear John Doe, as well as quoting their job or function, sales director or marketing director, or any other such title, as well as, again, using special characters. All this tends to contribute to negative performance on your open rates. Now, we've taken a look at the subject lines and the preview, so now let's move a little bit deeper into an email, the body. So the body is basically what makes our recipients respond to us, and how we're going to evaluate this is to basically look at response rates. So here, graphed in blue is the length of a body, how many words there are in the body, and graphed in green is basically the response rates. So you're going to see all the way from 0 all across to 250 words, the response rate stays reasonably high at the two ends of the graph. That's a 17% and a 19% response. Now, what we've taken away from this is we tend to find that shorter messages drive curiosity. Prospects tend to be more curious about what exactly you're doing when you send them a shorter message. Now, this doesn't apply for everybody, and this needs to be taken in correlation with whom exactly you're prospecting, but that's what we take away, at least from our data. So from 0 to 50 words, you have the principle of curiosity, and from 200 and 250 words onwards, what you have is what we call reciprocity. So let's take an example of a sales rep who's actually written a very personalized email to somebody over 200 to 250 words. One would actually tend to feel inclined to actually respond to him simply because you think that this person has taken the effort to actually write a very long and personalized email to myself, and therefore I really should respond. So that's what we take away from at least the length of the body. Remember, the final goal of any or all of these emails is to ask for a sales call or a sales meeting. Now, variables within the message body. It's interesting because we find that some of these are actually inverse. By quoting their job or their function in the body, that is, once again, VP of Sales, VP Marketing, CIO, CEO, you actually drive a 27% increase in responses. Asking for a meeting, coming to the point, don't beat around the bush, tell them precisely how many minutes you're going to take from their busy schedule. That drives a little bit of response as well. That's a plus 18%. And finally, the use of the company name in the body, which drives little to no impact of 1%. Now, inversely, using the first name in the body, once again, not the preview, actually has a negative impact. So if you're saying, hi, John, da 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 da, and finally in the body you say, John, I notice, so on and so forth, our data shows that that actually drives a negative 21% in response rate. Having special characters, which is uniform throughout the subject line, the preview, as well as the body, equivalently also decreases your response rates by 16%. And finally, curiously, saying thank you actually shows a negative drop of 11%. Why this is I have no idea why this is there actually. I say thank you and I say thank you all the time, and so far I think being courteous actually works. But apparently in terms of data, it shows that, well, being courteous does not always work. Alright, now let's have a look at scenarios. Scenarios are basically a series of emails. Why are we talking about a series of emails? Simply because salespeople don't just stop at one email. Based on what we've actually talked about today, one email, if you send one email and you actually get a response or you get a positive meeting request, that would be, I believe, heaven sent to some extent. You're going to want to try at least once again 8 times today. So let's have a look at the response rate based on the number of emails sent. So you're actually going to see that all the way you're going to have a 18%, 14%, 12% on the third email, 13% on the fourth email, 10% response rate on the fifth email. Now, it actually shows that at the sixth email, you actually have an increase in response. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that basically, Fabian, at the sixth email, it's basically people telling me to just bugger off and don't bother me. But that's not entirely true, because we've actually analyzed the positive response rate in each scenario. So if you take a look here, you're actually going to see that in email 1, 2, 3, all the way until 4, you're going to have a reasonable response rate of between 40 to 42%. The fourth and the fifth emails, they tend to be a little bit lower on the positive response rate. But on the sixth email, if someone is genuinely busy and has not been actually able to respond to you, they actually will be inclined to respond to you. So keep sending those emails. Now, let's have a look at the average or cumulated results of outreach scenarios. If we take the average, we're going to see that if you have a 69% open rate on the average, and you have 28% response rate of that 69%, and finally you have 31% positive responses on that 28%, you're going to arrive at approximately, let's say, taking 100 prospects that you prospected, you're going to at least get 6% positive response rate, which means 6 sales meetings. Now, going further, let's take a look at the kind of buyer personas or decision makers we're talking to, and let's take a look at their response rate. So here, graphed in blue, you actually have the open rate of scenarios across the board, and in green, you're going to have the response rate. So we'll see here, with actually no surprise, that the VPs of sales tend to have a very good response rate, as well as, well, I would say the CMOs and the BU managers and HR directors. Now, I think VPs of sales and CMOs, they tend to be very used to talking to people, and they tend to be chatty. As long as it's not closing quarter and they've hit their targets, they will be willing to talk to you. Now, what surprises me on this graph is actually CIOs tend to be a little bit less responsive. I would have imagined that CIOs would be the first ones to be able to see probably a good product fit with an email, and they would be the first ones to respond, but apparently I'm wrong. And finally, on the average, we have a 69% open rate as well as an average of a 28% response rate. A small side analysis we actually did was also comparing larger companies, that is more than 500 employees, versus SMBs, which is less than 500 employees. And we tend to find that the open rate for SMBs and the positive response rate for SMBs tend to be significantly higher. If you look at that graph, it's nearly 27%, and 27% increase open rates, as well as an increased 75% positive response rate. So that's something to take into account as well. Now, let's take a look at the different kinds of sectors that we prospect. So looking here, we'll see that, no surprises, legal is one of the most easy people to prospect via email. They tend to be very, very responsive. And further down, you have corporate services, which includes public relations, marketing, corporate training. They also tend to respond very well. And surprise, government services also tend to respond very well. Now, normally we would expect that the government services would be a little bit behind on the response rate, but surprisingly here, it's shown that email prospection within public sectors is actually reasonably effective. Now, going down the rest of the industries and this list, you'll see you have the service sectors, construction, medical, high-tech sectors, manufacturing, as well as finance. So have a look at those statistics, and hopefully your sector that you're prospecting is here on this graph. If not, please feel free to reach out to me after the webinar. So I thank you very much for joining us today. Once again, this is ICO, and we sell a sales automation solution which predicts whom to target and automates sales email scenarios to actually get meetings. Now, behind this is a strong professional services team to actually build you scenarios that work based on data. Everything I've shared with you today are the true life statistics of our customers, and if you'd like to reach the same results, or you'd like to find out the more detailed data on your typical decision maker, please feel free to reach out to me so that we can talk about it. Thank you all very much for joining us today, and we'll be sending you the recording tomorrow morning.